Hey guys, in today's lecture, we'll be discussing the remaining part of the short story, A Temporary Matter by Jhumpa Lahiri. Now, in the previous lecture, we discussed the introductory paragraphs of this short story. Now, the major protagonists of this short story are Shobha and Shukumar. Shukumar is a doctoral student. He is writing his thesis and he is working from home. He is around 35 years old. Shobha is a working woman. She is 33 years old. And it seems like the gender roles are reversed in this family because Shukumar is working from home and he is a homebody. He knows how to cook and he is there in the kitchen at the beginning of the short story. He is working in the kitchen. He's making dish for dinner. And Shobha enters and she has just gone to the gym and she enters into the household and she reads a notice that tells about a blackout that is going to take place in their locality. Now they are going to face electricity shortages for an hour starting from 8 p.m. and this would last for 5 days. So it's somewhat like load shedding. So they are going to face blackouts for an hour because a storm had just happened and it had caused breakage on electrical lines. It has broken the electrical lines, so they need time to fix it, to set it all right. And thus, the community in which they live, they have issued a notice to its residents that there will be a 1 hour blackout. ഒരു മണിക്കൂറിലത്തേക്ക് ഇലക്ട്രിസിറ്റി ഒന്നും കാണില്ല, ഇലക്ട്രിസിറ്റി കട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ പോവാണെന്ന് അവർ താമസിക്കുന്ന ആ നെയ്ബർഹുഡ് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ലൊക്കാലിറ്റിയിലുള്ള ആൾക്കാർ ഒരു നോട്ടീസ് ഓൾറെഡി ഇഷ്യൂ ചെയ്തിട്ടുണ്ട്. ആൻഡ് ശോഭ is the one who reads about it. And at that time, Shukumar is there in the kitchen and he's preparing food. And for Shobha, this is a minor inconvenience. And the blackout is an inconvenience for Shukumar too. It is a temporary inconvenience that they might have to face. So Shobha says that they should have done this in the mornings. But Shukumar is always in the home in the mornings because he is currently writing his thesis and he needs peace of mind and he needs electricity. So he says that in the mornings I'll be at home. So at that time I write and I don't need blackouts at that time of the hour. So the kind of conversations that they have with each other is superficial. They talk about the blackout, they talk about the food that Shukumar has prepared, and they don't engage in deep conversations. In fact, the conversation that they have with each other is minimal. They don't talk much. And it seems like they are drifting apart. The couple who are presented here are drifting apart. And then there is a flashback that is shown here, and it takes us to a time frame 6 months ago. So in the flashback, it is revealed that Shobha was pregnant 6 months ago, and she was fully pregnant. She was nearing her term. And at that time, Shukumar had to attend an academic conference in Baltimore. Now, Baltimore is in Maryland in the United States of America. So he had to go to Baltimore. And Shobha, though she was pregnant, nearing her term, she forced Shukumar to go and attend the conference because if he attended the conference, then he would be making more contacts. And since he would be joining the job market next year, it would aid him to make connections and to get to some place which is safe. So she encourages him to go to that conference in Baltimore. Though Shukumar never wanted to go, it is Shobha who forces him to go. And at that time, they didn't have mobile phones like we have these days because the story was again written in the 90s and at that time they didn't have mobile phones or anything. So Shobha collects information regarding the hotels that he would stay in and she also keeps a copy of his conference schedule and flight numbers for that matter, the flight numbers in which he would be traveling and all those details. And she also says that her friend Gillian would be with her and if something happens, that Gillian would take her to the nearby hospital. So it is Shobha who forces Shukumar to go to that academic conference, and this happened 6 months earlier, and at that time she was pregnant. Now, Shukumar remembers that day vividly, the day in which he parted Shobha to go to Baltimore. At that time, Shobha was heavily pregnant and he entered into a cab. He even remembers the minute details about the cab. He still remembers that the cab was painted red with blue letterings. So he still vividly remembers that image of Shobha standing there, heavily pregnant, and he entering into a cab, red colored with blue letterings. And then there is this line that is there, which says, each time he thought of that moment, which means that he thinks about this moment ever so often. So he thinks about this moment, thinks about it on a daily basis, maybe. He thinks about it a lot, which means that something might have happened. Because now, cut to today, we don't see any presence of children in their home. And it is hinted that 6 months ago, Shubha was heavily pregnant. So, had she given birth to a baby, then there would be some kind of a presence of a child in that house, but it's not there. So, it seems like Shobha might have faced a miscarriage. In that case, Shukumar still remembers the time in which he parted with Shobha, so it shows that he is still traumatized by the thought that he was not there for her when she needed him the most. So he is still traumatized by the thought, the guilt that he was not there when his wife needed him the most. And then again, the wagon is described in vivid detail and it was quite spacious. Even Shukumar thought about buying such a wagon soon because they too had a car but it was too small, and since they are expanding their family, Shukumar wanted to buy a wagon this big because then he would be able to take Shubha as well as the children. If they have children, he would be able to take the children to different places, right? And he would be able to take them. He would be able to take them to music lessons and to dentist appointments in this wagon that he would be riding. So he would be gripping the wheel, and the Shobha would be turning around, giving the children juice to drink. So again, Shukumar here is presented as a 35-year-old student, right? He is a doctoral student, so it seems like he's an eternal student. He still does not have a stable job, and it seems like Shobha is the one who is running the family. She is the one who works extra time, whereas Shukumar always stays at home, so he is always in the house, inside the house, whereas Shobha is also always outside the house, and she does extra work in the office because she wishes to get away from home whenever possible. So she does not wish to stay in home or she does not wish to be in home, whereas Shukumar always spends his time in home trying to write his thesis. And again, it is hinted in this paragraph that Shukumar was very much apprehensive when he came to know that he is going to become a father. Because at first he thought that he is still a student, so how will he be able to manage a family and a household because he still hasn't got a job. But then, at that moment in which he saw Shobha for the last time pregnant, in which she was holding on to her belly, he had that thought that he would soon start a family of his own and then he would have to buy a larger wagon so that he could take the children to different places. Now he was thinking about having two children, not one child, but having two children. So he was ready for taking up the next responsibilities in life. And it was at that time, maybe something to do with that in that life. A member of the staff had found him somehow among the identical convention rooms and handed him a stiff square of stationery. It was only a telephone number, but Shukumar knew it was a hospital. When he returned to Boston, it was over. The baby had been born dead. Shobha was lying on the bed, asleep, in a private room, so small there was barely enough space to stand beside her. In a wing of the hospital they hadn't been to on the tour for expectant parents. So see, this is a very grim image that is being put by Chupa Larry. So he had gone to a conference, and one of his staff members came to him and handed a piece of square stationery, handed him a paper, and in that paper, in that piece of paper, there was a phone number, and he knew that it was from the hospital. So when he returned back to Boston, everything was over. They had lost their child. The child was born as a stillborn child. They lost their child. And Shobha was still asleep on bed. And they were in that part of the hospital that they never visited in their tour as expectant parents. So if you are expecting a child, then you would frequent hospitals, right? You would go to hospitals more often. But they had never gone to this part of the wing, which was so congested, because if they gave birth to a child, then again they would be giving birth in a much more spacious place, right? Now she was lying in a very narrow space. Now that's again a type of condition that Indians have to go through, because even though you get settled in America or Canada for that matter, after you're married for that matter, uh, you won't be given all the amenities as you would think. You won't be getting all the amenities that you would get in Kerala or India for that matter, because you may have to live in deplorable conditions because of the standard of living, because of the high standard of living. You would have to pay a bomb for getting admitted to a hi-fi hospital or a multi-speciality hospital for that matter. So here they are in a hospital, and they had never visited this part of the hospital because they always visited the hospital for checking the status of the baby. And at that time, they never used to visit this narrow part of the hospital. And now she was lying in that narrow bed. Now, this is what had happened. Her placenta had weakened, and she had had a cesarean. Though not quickly enough, the doctor explained that these things happen. So her placenta got weakened, and she had a cesarean. And this didn't happen quickly. The doctor explained to them that these things do happen, that they might have to face cesarean. He smiled in the kindest way it was possible to smile at people known only professionally. So if you know people professionally, then you would smile at them occasionally, right? And this is a kind smile that you give out. Like that, the doctor to give out a smile to them. Shobha would be back on her feet in a few weeks, the doctor had said. There was nothing to indicate that she would not be able to have children in the future. So again, Shobha would be able to stand on her 2 feet in a few days, and nothing in her reports indicate that she won't be able to have children in the future. So she is still healthy. These days, Shobha was always gone by the time Shukumar woke up. He would open his eyes and see the long black hairs she shed on her pillow, and think of her, dressed, sipping her third cup of coffee already, in her office downtown, where she searched for typographical errors in textbooks and marked them in a code she had explained to him, with an assortment of colored pencils. She would do the same for his dissertation. She promised when it was ready. So again, these days, Shobha was gone by the time Shukumar woke up. These days, whenever Shukumar woke up, Shobha was already gone, because she never wanted to be in that house after this incident, right? So when something traumatic happens in your life, you don't wish to get back to the same place and the same environment in which you faced that intense trauma. Similar to that, Shobha too didn't want to stay at home, so he would leave the house even before Shukumar woke up, right? And when he woke up, or when he wakes up, he would think that Shobha would be in her office, and she would be drinking her third cup of coffee already. And her office is in the downtown, it is in the neighborhood, and she would be searching for typographical errors on textbooks. So she is a copy editor. She searches for errors in the textbooks, typos in the textbooks, and she would mark them in a code. And she would mark them using colored pencils. So it was a very mundane job. She was a copy editor. And she even said that she would help Shukumar with his dissertation when it is complete. He envied her the specificity of her task was so unlike the elusive nature of his. Now there is a kind of envy, a kind of jealousy that's there within Shukumar because Shobha does a very mundane work, right? Day-to-day work that she does for living is copy editing. Copy editing is textbooks grammatical errors and mistakes and spelling mistakes is correct here. This is a very mundane work, very predictable, right? Her work is so predictable. Each day she would be doing the same task, correcting textbooks with colored pencils. But his work is elusive. Now, when you start writing dissertation for that matter, it's not that easy task for you to do because you write it on your own. You write a whole lot of stuff on your own. You need to read on your own. So your work is elusive. You cannot say how it would end up in the end. It is so unpredictable. How your dissertation would turn up to be, it is so unpredictable. So his work is a bit elusive in nature, meaning it is shifty, slippery. You cannot say that it is a very specific task. He's not doing just one task as Shobha does, right? She is just hunting mistakes in textbooks, but his work is more elusive in nature. He himself cannot predict the outcome of his work. He was a mediocre student who had a facility of absorbing details without curiosity. Until September, he had been diligent, if not dedicated, summarizing chapters, outlining arguments on pads of yellow lined paper. But now he would lie in their bed until he grew bored, gazing at his side of the closet, which Shobha always left partly open, at the row of the tweed jackets and the corduroy trousers he would not have to choose from to teach his lessons that semester. So again, this explains a whole lot about Shukumar. Now, Shukumar was always a mediocre student. He was not an exceptional student or anything. He was just a mediocre student. And he would absorb all details without having any curiosity, right? If you are a good student, you would always pose questions to your teachers. You would always be curious. But here, Shukumar was just a mediocre student. He would just imbibe whatever that the teacher teaches without ever questioning them. He was a person without curiosity. Until September, he was diligent. He was very much confident that he would complete his thesis. He was not lazy. He was diligent and dedicated to the work that he was doing. He was summarizing his chapters, outlining the major arguments in a pad of yellow lined paper. So he would be outlining his arguments on a writing pad or on sticky notes for that matter. But now he would lie in his bed until he grew bored. But after the incident, after Shobha's miscarriage, now he would just lie on the bed and he would just lie on the bed until he grew bored of just lying in the bed. He would just gaze on his side of the closet, and Shobha would always leave his side of the closet partly open, and he would just look at his jackets and trousers, tweed jackets and corduroy trousers, and these are the kind of clothes that was in the 90s, right? So see, these are tweed jackets and corduroy trousers, right? These are the kind of clothes that academicians in the West would wear, right? Like this person over here. These are the kind of clothes that academicians would normally wear in their semesters in the Western countries. So that clearly indicates the kind of culture that they were in, the kind of time period that they lived in. But now he would lie in their bed until he grew bored, gazing at his side of the closet, which Shobha always left partly open. At the row of tweed jackets and corduroy trousers he would not have to choose from to teach his classes that semester. So he always wore the same type of clothing, especially if you are into academia. You won't be having a colorful wardrobe or anything. Especially for men, they would be wearing the same kind of clothing. And for him, it was the same tweed jacket and corduroy trousers that he would be wearing to teach the third semester. And in the Western countries, it is a popular thing that if you are doing your doctoral degree, along with that, you would also be teaching in a university and you'd be getting fellowship for that. You would be getting a stipend for that for teaching and engaging in developing study materials and so on and so forth. So, after the baby died, it was too late to withdraw from his teaching duties, but his advisor had arranged things so that he had the spring semester to himself. So when his baby died, it was too late to withdraw from his teaching duties. So he was so immersed in his teaching duties that he could not take leave at the time in which his baby died. But his advisor had arranged things so that he had the spring semester to himself. He could be all by himself. He could work from home during the spring semester. Shukumar was in the sixth year of the graduate school. Graduate school means PG degrees or PhD programs. Graduate school or grad school means your master's degree or your doctoral programs, right? So he was in the sixth year of his graduate school. So sixth year means he was a PhD student or a PhD research scholar. So Shukumar was in his sixth year of graduate school. So in the foreign universities, you have four main seasons. Semesters would fall in these four main seasons. So you have fall months, you have the spring and winter and summer months, right? But there are only three semesters in colleges during this time period. They have the summer semester, usually 3 months long, from June to August. Then they have the fall semester. Now, the fall semester falls from the month of September to December, and then they have the spring semester. Now, the spring semester is again a 4 month semester starting from January and ending in April, right? So, here again, when his baby died, he was in the fall semester, right? It was in September. And ever since then, he was not able to do any teaching work, but still he was assigned teaching duties. So, his advisor had arranged things so that he would be able to take classes for the spring semester from his home. And he also said to Shukumar that since he is in the sixth grade of graduate school, he could take classes from his home for the spring semester, that is till April, and then he could also take up the job during the summer, and at that time he would be able to complete or finish off his thesis, so he would be able to wrap things up by next September, so that he would be able to wrap things up by the fall semester, right? So that is what his advisor said to him, but nothing of that sort happened. But nothing was pushing Shukumar. Instead, he thought of how he and Shobha had become experts at avoiding each other in their three-bedroom house, spending as much time on separate floors as possible. He thought of how he no longer looked forward to weekends, and she sat for hours on sofa with her colored pencil and her files, so that he feared that putting on a record in his own house might be rude. He thought of how long it had been since she looked into his eyes and smiled or whispered his name. On those rare occasions, they still reached for each other's bodies before sleeping. So it seems clear that the couple had drifted off from each other ever since Shobha had a miscarriage, because now even Shukumar couldn't concentrate fully on his work. So guilt was slowly killing him because he was not there when Shobha needed him the most. And then they lost the child, and he was not able to finish his work, his thesis for that matter, on time. And now Shobha and Shukumar have become experts in avoiding each other. Though they lived in a three-bedroom house. A three-bedroom house means it's not that big a house, it's a very modest house. Though they lived in three-bedroom house, they would spend as much time in separate floors as possible. They would spend time in different places as possible. They won't come together and sit together. Even in weekends, they won't be together. And while she is at home, she would be doing her work in the office. That is, Shubha would be copy editing from home, and she would be there with her colored pencils on the sofa, and she would be doing her work. And at that time, Shukma won't disturb her or play music or play a record in his own home, because he would think that that would sound rude. So he won't play music or anything if she is around the house. And they hadn't even looked at each other in the eye for a long time. And Shobha hadn't whispered his name in a romantic manner to him, and they don't even have an intimate relationship these days. So in the beginning, he had believed that it would pass, and he and Shobha would get through it somehow. So in the beginning, Shukumar still had hope that they would get through this phase in their life. She was only 33. She was strong, on her feet again. But it wasn't a consolation. It was often nearly lunchtime when Shukumar would finally pull himself out of bed and head downstairs to the coffee pot, pouring out the extra bit Shobha left for him, along with an empty mug on the counter. So again, he thought that this phase in their life in which they didn't talk with each other, Shukumar thought that this phase would pass on and they would be able to communicate with each other somehow. And Shobha was still 33, and the doctor had said that they would still have children. She was on her feet again even after a miscarriage. So that was a consolation. She was happy and healthy. But Shukumar found it difficult to cope with everything. So at times in days, it would take him much time to reach downstairs, right? So it would be around lunchtime that Shukumar would wake up and go downstairs to have this cup of coffee that Shobha had prepared for him. So he, in a way, was much affected by the death of their child. Shukumar gathered onion skins in his hands and let them drop in the garbage pile on the top of ribbons of the fat he had trimmed from the lamb. So now Shukumar was cleaning the kitchen. He was just gathering the onion skins and the fat that he has just trimmed off from the lamb. He ran the water in the sink, soaking the knife and cutting board, and rubbed a lemon half along his fingertips to get rid of the garlic smell, a trick he learned from Shobha. So here, Shukumar is clearly doing the household chores and he knows how to keep his kitchen neat and clean. So he just rubs lemon onto the cutting board so that he would get rid of the garlic smell. And this is a trick that Shobha taught him. And he still remembers the trick and he does it. So he has no qualms in doing the household chores. It was 7:30. Through the window he saw the sky like soft black pitch. Uneven banks of snow still lined the sidewalks. Though it was warm enough for people to walk about without hats or gloves, nearly 3 feet had fallen in the last storm, so that for a week people had to walk single file in narrow trenches. For a week, that was Shukumar's excuse for not leaving the house. But now the trenches were widening and the water drained steadily into the grates in the pavement. So it was 7:30, so it was nearing the time of the blackout. Through the window, he saw the sky like soft pitch black. So through the window, he saw the sky, and it was pitch darkness, soft black pitch. Uneven banks of snow still lined the sidewalks, and on the sidewalks, you could see uneven snow, uneven banks of snow. You could see mounds of snow in the sidewalks. Sidewalk in snow കുമിഞ്ഞു കൂടി കിടക്കുന്നത് കാണാം. Though it was warm enough for people to walk about without hats or gloves, um, nearly 3 feet had fallen in the last storm, so that for a week people had to walk in a single file. So the snowfall was so severe that people had to walk in narrow trenches. It was around 3 feet uh, long, and they had to walk in this narrow trenches in a single file. Single file എന്ന് വെച്ച് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ ഈ സോൾജിയേഴ്സ് നടന്നു പോകുന്ന പോലെ ഒരു ക്യൂവിൽ അവർക്ക് നടന്നു പോകണമായിരുന്നു. And even the snow was thick that it had formed a kind of a trench like this. So they had to walk in a single file. So though they were not wearing gloves or anything because it was warm enough that they didn't have to wear a gloves, but still there was so much snow that they had to walk in a single file or in a queue through the narrow trenches of snow. So that was the reason why Shukumar excused from ever getting outside, because Shukumar had now found out an excuse. That is, in the outside there was heavy snowstorm, and hence he was not willing to get out of the house. But now the trenches were widening and the water drained steadily into the grates in the pavement. But now the trenches that the snow had formed was widening. Now the path was getting widened and the snow slowly melted off and the water from the snow drained straight to the grates in the pavement. പേയ്മെന്റ്സിലെ ചെറിയ ചെറിയ ഗ്രേറ്റ്സ് കാണും. നിങ്ങൾ ഫോറിൻ കൺട്രീസിലെ പേയ്മെന്റ്സ് ഒക്കെ നോക്കിക്കഴിഞ്ഞ് കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ അവിടെ ചെറിയ മാൻഹോൾ തരത്തിലുള്ള കാര്യങ്ങൾ കാണും. അപ്പോൾ ആ ഗ്രേറ്റ്സിലൂടെ snowfall either and then water melt either പോകുന്നു. So now the snow has slowly receded. Now they could go out, but still Shukumar preferred to be at home all the time. The lamp won't be done by 8, Shukumar said. We may have to eat in the dark. So remember, the blackout would start at 8 p.m., right? So Shukumar says to Shobha that the lamp won't get cooked until it's 8 o'clock, so they have to eat in the dark. We can light candles, Shobha suggested. She unclipped her hair, coiled neatly at her nape during the days, and pried the sneakers from her feet without untying them. I'm going to shower before the lights go out, she said, heading for the staircase. I'll be down. So now Shobha had just returned from the gym, remember? So she unclipped her hair and she said that we can light the candles and we can have a candlelight dinner. And her hair just fell on her nape. Nape means the back of your neck, the back part of your neck. So her hair just coiled neatly at her nape. So she had somewhat a kind of a boycott. So her hair fell on her nape just behind the back of her neck. And she tried to remove the sneakers without untying them. And then she said that I'll be going to take a shower and I'll be back in a few minutes. So she just wanted to take a shower before the blackout. Shukumar moved her satchel and her sneakers to the side of the fridge. So usually it's a woman who does all these things, right? But here the roles are again reversed. She wasn't this way before. She used to put her coat on a hanger and her sneakers in the closet. She paid bills as soon as they came, but now she treated the house as if it were a hotel. So again, Shukumar notices these small things about Shobha. Again, a clear-cut picture of Shobha has been given. Shobha was not like this before. She was a very prompt and punctual person, and whenever she returned back from work, she would hang her coats on the hanger. She would put her sneakers on the closet. She would pay the bills in the house as soon as they came. So as soon as the bills came, she would pay the bills. But now she treated the house as if it were a hotel. Now she treated the house as if she was just a paying guest at a hotel. The fact that the yellow chintz armchair in the living room clashed with the blue and maroon Turkish carpet no longer bothered her. So once Shobha wanted to make this house a home for them. So at that time she used to give more importance to the interior of the house. So she would take notice of the armchair. So if the armchair was yellow in color, then the carpet should not be blue in color because that would be too much of a contrast. So she would remove it. But now she didn't even care about the contrast that was there between the armchair, between the yellow armchair and the blue and maroon colored Turkish carpet. On the enclosed porch at the back of the house, a crisp white bag still sat on a wicker chase, filled with lace she had once planned to turn into curtains. And on their porch, inside a bag, there were cloth laces which she wished to turn into curtains. So she wanted to renovate the house, she wanted to change the way in which the house looks. See, when you get pregnant or when you wish to have a child, then you wish to change the house in which you live, right? So that you would be able to welcome the baby into a new atmosphere, into a new room for that matter. So she too wanted to redecorate the house and she bought all these laces, but it still lay there on their garage and she was not willing to put it in the windowsill because she was not willing to do anything with the house these days. So all this shows that she has turned distant from the house itself. She does not want to renovate the house. She does not want to have anything to do with the house. She is always outside. She is just trying to forget the pain that was involved in the miscarriage. While Shobha showered, Shukumar went into downstairs bathroom and found a new toothbrush in its box beneath the sink. The chief's stiff bristles hurt his gum and he spit some blood into the basin. The spare brush was one of many stored in a metal basket. Shobha had bought them once when they were on sale, in the event that a visitor decided at the last minute to spend the night. Now Shukumar went downstairs and he took a toothbrush, a new toothbrush. So they had even bought a toothbrush for a visitor who might come to visit. So suppose a visitor suddenly decides to drop in, and when visitors do drop in and they are asked to stay back, then they won't be carrying toothbrush and the like along with them, right? So they even had a toothbrush in their home, which shows that Shobha was a very meticulous homemaker. She knew how to remove the odor of garlic from the cutting board. She even purchased laces to redecorate her home. She once had great interest in interior designing, but now she has grown distant from her home. It's again shown in these passages. It was typical of her. She was the type to prepare for surprises. So again, this was something which was typical of Shobha. So she even planned to keep a toothbrush in case a visitor might visit. So ചില സമയത്ത് ഒട്ടും എക്സ്പെക്ട് ചെയ്യാതെ ചില വിസിറ്റേഴ്സ് നിങ്ങളുടെ വീട്ടിലോട്ട് വരാറില്ലേ ആൻഡ് അവർ പറയും ഞങ്ങൾ ഇന്ന് സ്റ്റേ ബാക്ക് ചെയ്യാമെന്ന് പറയുമ്പോൾ യു വുഡ് ബി മോർ ദാൻ ഹാപ്പി ടു വെൽക്കം. സോ ശോഭ വാസ് സച്ച് എ പേഴ്സൺ ദാറ്റ് ഷീ വാസ് ഈവൻ planned for surprises. Because even if someone um, decided to give them a sudden surprise, she would be planned. She won't be caught off guard. She would be planned for the surprise visits made by the visitors. It was typical of her. She was the type to prepare for surprises, good and bad. If she found a skirt or a purse she liked, she bought two. She kept the bonuses from her job in a separate bank account in her name. It hadn't bothered him. His own mother had fallen to pieces when his father died, abandoning the house he grew up and moving back to Calcutta, leaving Shukumar to settle it all. So Shobha was a different type of a person. She was even prepared for surprises, even if it was good or even if it was bad. So if she found a skirt or a purse that she liked, she bought a pair of them. She kept bonuses from her job in a separate bank account in her name. So she was always a very calculative and planning woman. So if she ever received a bonus, then she would keep it in another bank account that's there in her name. It hadn't bothered him. It hadn't bothered him that she had her own finances. His own mother had fallen into pieces when his father died. So it hadn't bothered him that she was an independent woman because he knew the pains of his own mother. Because when his father died, his mother was still young and she broke into pieces. They had to abandon their house in Calcutta, and Shukumar had to settle all the debts of his father and all the expenses of his father. He liked that Shobha was different. He liked that Shobha was very calculative and she planned everything ahead. She was even prepared for surprises. That was the kind of woman that she is. This theme of planning that Shobha has. She was always planned for the best as well as the worst. But when such a thing happens, when she loses her baby, she was not planned for that. She was planning for a better future. But then catastrophe struck. She was not planning for that. So even a woman who is so much of an independent woman who plans ahead in her life, she would fall into crumbles if she faces something like this, right? So this is what had happened with Shobha. Now, once Shukumar liked this aspect of Shobha in which she was financially independent and she was always prepared for anything that would happen in their life. It astonished him her capacity to think ahead. So it always astonished him the way in which she always thinks about the future. It astonished him her capacity to think ahead. When she used to do shopping, the pantry was always stocked with extra bottles of olive oil and corn oil, depending on whether they were cooking Italian or Indian. So she was also a very good homemaker. Now it comes across that Shobha was also a very good homemaker. So they used to stock these oils well in advance whenever they shops. She would fill her pantry with food articles like corn oil or olive oil, depending on whether they are making Italian or Indian. There were endless boxes of pastas in all shapes, colors, zippered sacks of basmati rice, whose whole sides of lamb and goats from the Muslim butchers at Haymarket, chopped up and frozen in endless plastic bags. Every other Sunday, they wound through the maze of stalls Shukumar eventually knew by heart. So once they enjoyed a very happy and vibrant life. where they would go to supermarkets and they would purchase things, and they would be purchasing things en masse. That is, they would be purchasing a whole lot of things and they would be stocking it up, right? And this is also a very typical middle class behavior, especially in the American consumerist society, where they would stock up things well in advance, right? Even during COVID pandemic, that was one of the major things that had happened in America. They would stock up things well in advance. If something happens, that's always there in their mind. If something happens, what will we do? So they would always stock up things. So like that, though they were Indians, still Shobha and Shukmar were stocking up things well in advance. And once he knew even the different aisles of the supermarket by heart. He watched in disbelief as she bought more food, trailing behind her with canvas bags as she pushed through the crowd, arguing under the morning sun with boys too young to shave but already missing teeth, who twisted up brown papers of artichokes, plums, ginger roots, and yams and dropped them on their scales and tossed them to Shobha one by one. She didn't mind being jostled even when she was being pregnant. So Shobha was this woman who would haggle with shopkeepers. Okay. And she would always carry these huge bags containing vegetables and she would walk through a very busy market place. She would jostle means push and shovel through people, just push through a very crowded marketplace. And even when she was heavily pregnant. So this was a very active woman. Shobha was a very active homemaker. She was tall and broad shouldered with hips that her obstetrician assured her were made for childbearing. She had childbearing hips. So even in India, it's there, right? When men come to see women with the prospect of marriage, they always look at the way in which her hips are placed, right? Especially the women in the family of the groom. They would always look at the hips of the woman because if you have a wider hip, then that means that you are capable of childbearing. So she had a childbearing hip, and even her obstetrician said her that. During the drive back home, as the car curved along the Charles, they invariably marveled at how much food they had bought. So whenever they drove back home, they always marveled at the kind of extra food that they have bought after haggling with shopkeepers. It never went to waste. When friends dropped by, Shobha would throw together meals that appeared to have taken half a day to prepare. Now, Shobha was also a person who used to throw parties, and the food that they bought, it never went to waste because when people came, she would just make up things from the limited things that was available in her home. From the things she had frozen and bottles, not cheap things in tins, but peppers she had marinated herself with rosemary and chutney she cooked on Sundays, stirring boiling pots of potatoes and prunes. So she was again a typical homemaker because she knew how to cook food. And this was not a food that came straight from the can, right? So in America, it is quite a culture to eat straight from cans. They have canned tunas, they have canned tomatoes. For that matter, they don't buy fresh tomatoes. Instead, they would prefer to buy canned tomatoes. Nowadays, the things have changed a lot. But Shobha used to cook food on her own. She would marinate things. She would bottle up tomatoes and keep it separately. She would pickle food. She would make chutneys all by herself. She would make marinade all by herself, right? Um, and she cooked on Sundays, stirring boiling pots of tomatoes and prunes. So she would be boiling pots of tomatoes and prunes. Her labeled mason jars lined the shelf of the kitchen in endless sealed pyramids, enough they'd agreed to last for their grandchildren to taste. And again, this is also a thing that people in the foreign countries would do. They would pickle things up because during the winter season, during the harsh winters, it would be difficult to procure vegetables and fruits, right? So at that time, they would always keep these vegetables and fruits in mason jars. They would pickle it up and keep it in separate mason jars and use it in their cooking. And this can be used for generation. These are preserved food materials, right? So this can be used for generations. So she would do that. She would pickle things up, put it in mason jars, and this would again last for generations. They had eaten it all by now, but now everything that she had prepared, they had eaten it all by now, which shows that Shobha no longer cooks, and it's Sukumar who cooks. And they have consumed whatever that she had made because she was not willing to cook for a long time because she was still in grief. Shukuma had been going through their supplies steadily, preparing meals for two of them, measuring out cupfuls of rice, defrosting bags of meat day after day. He combed through her cookbooks every afternoon, following her penciled instructions to use 2 teaspoons of ground coriander seeds instead of one, or red lentils instead of yellow. Each of the recipes was dated, telling the first time they had the dish together. April 2nd, cauliflower with fennel. January 14th, chicken with almonds and sultanas. He had no memory of eating those meals, yet there they were, recorded in her proofreader's hand. Shukumar enjoyed cooking now. It was the only thing that made him feel productive. If it weren't for him, he knew Shobha would eat a bowl of cereal for her dinner. So now things have changed. Now Shobha would prefer to eat a bowl of cereal even for dinner. So a bowl of cereal is something which you eat for your breakfast, right? Now Shobha is not much interested in preparing food, but Shukuma has found solace in making food. Now, when you go through intense periods of trauma, again, cooking can be very much therapeutic. It is very much therapeutic. And here again, he just follows the recipes and instructions which were laid down by Shobha. So Shobha had this habit that whenever she prepared food, she would write it as a recipe in her own proofreader's handwriting, and then she would write the date in which she prepared that particular food, that particular recipe. Now Shukumar didn't remember any of those days in which they prepared that food for the first time, but now Shobha no longer cooks and it is Shukumar who cooks, and he really enjoys the act of cooking. Now he is the one who procures materials from the market, and it is he who defrosts the meat and cook food. Tonight, with no lights, they would have to eat together. For months now, they had served themselves from the stove, and he had taken his plate into his study, letting the meal grow cold on his desk before showing it into his mouth without pause, while Shobha took her plate to her living room, watched game shows, or proofread files with her arsenal colored pencils at hand. Now, this is the first time since ages that they would be eating together. So, tonight, with no lights, they would eat together. So, the blackout has brought them closer together. Tonight, for the first time, they would be eating together. For months now, they had served themselves from the stove. So from months now, they would just take food directly from the stove. Shugma would go to his study and eat food all by himself, alone. Shobha would take the food and go to the drawing room where she would either watch a television show and consume the food, or she would be proofreading her books, her files, and then she would be eating off from her plate. And she was always prepared for doing her job. She would always have her colored pencils at her hand. So the blackout has really brought them close together because for the first time they would be eating together in the dark. At some point in the evening, she visited him. When he heard her approach, he would put away his novel and begin typing sentences. She would rest her hands on his shoulders and stare with him into the blue glow of the computer screen. Don't work too hard, she would say after a minute or two, and head off to bed. It was one time in the day she sought him out, and yet he had come to dread it. He knew it was something she forced herself to do. She would look around the walls of the rooms which they had decorated together last summer, with a border of marching ducks and rabbits playing trumpets and drums. By the end of August, there was a cherry crib under the window, a wide changing table with mint green knobs, and a rocking chair with checkered cushions. Sukumar has dissembled it all before bringing Shobha back from the hospital, scraping off the rabbits and ducks with a spatula. For some reason, the room did not haunt him the way it haunted Shobha. In January, when he stopped working at his carrel in the library, he set up his desk there deliberately, partly because the room soothed him, and partly because it was a place Shobha avoided. Now, again, we are moving deeper and deeper into their relationship. So, at some point in the evening, she visited him. So, when she returned back home, at some point in the evening, she visited him. She often visited him. And when he heard her approach, he would put away his novel and begin typing sentences. So whenever he heard Shobha approaching, suddenly he would put away his novel. So he would be just whiling away his time reading a novel. So whenever he heard her approach, then he would put away novel and sit in front of the computer screen just writing random things. So he is not doing his work. He just pretends that he's doing his work. He's writing his thesis. She would rest her hands on his shoulders and stare with him into the blue glow of the computer screen. So when she comes, she would see him working with the computers and she would stare at the computer screen and then she would say to him, "Don't work too hard." In reality, he was not working hard. He was just reading a novel. So he just wants to evade Shobha. He just wants to um, avoid Shobha and her conversations. So he just pretends that he's doing his work. So she would just come and say that don't work too hard. She would say after a minute or two and head off to bed. It was one time in the day she sought him out. So one day she sought out to him. She reached out to him. But he was so dreadful. He dreaded that moment. He didn't want to spend time with her. He knew it was something she forced herself to do. He knew that when she reached out to him, maybe to have an intimate moment with each other, he knew that she was not reaching out to him because she truly loved him, but she was just reaching out to him out of desperation. So he dreaded that moment. He didn't like that moment. He wanted her to reach out to him out of love. But here she was doing just a forced, mundane thing. She would look around the walls of the room which they had decorated together last summer. Then she would come to his room, and the place that he has converted into his office was in reality the place that they wanted to change into their children's room, right? So now Shukumar is working in the children's room. They had changed a room in their home to welcome the baby. And Shukumar has carefully chosen that room because Shobha would avoid that room because that room brings in so many bad memories to her. So she would just avoid the room, but Shukumar had slowly shifted to the room so that he would be able to avoid Shobha. Now again, see the way in which the room was decorated. She would look around the walls of the room, which they had decorated together last summer, with a border of marching ducks and rabbits playing trumpets and drum. So they had decorated the room with the images of ducks and rabbits playing trumpets and drums. So it was clearly a children's room. By the end of August, there was a cherry crib under the window. So in the August, they bought a crib. They bought a crib. So they bought a crib and placed it under the window. A white changing table with mint green knobs, and they even placed a table so that they would change the dress of the baby. So they bought a white changing table with mint green knobs attached to it. They bought a rocking chair so that they would rock the child to sleep with checkered cushions. Shukumar has disassembled it all before bringing Shobha back from hospital. So he had disassembled the crib, the rocking chair and everything before he brought back Shobha from the hospital. Scraping off the rabbits and duck with a spatula. For some reason, the room did not haunt him the way it haunted Shobha. For some reason, he was not haunted by the room the way it haunted Shobha. Now, it is mostly women who change rooms, right? Who turn rooms into children's rooms or their bedrooms. So, women have a close attachment towards room. But Shukumar didn't feel anything about the room. He was distant, and even when the entire thing happened, he was not there. So Shukuma was very much okay with spending his time in this room, so he converted it into a library. For some reason, the room did not haunt him the way it haunted Shobha. In January, when he stopped working at his carrel in the library, he set up his desk there deliberately. So in January, when he stopped working at his carrel in the library, carrel is a small cubicle that you have in library. So these are small cubicles in which research scholars might sit in. So he stopped working at his carrel in the library. He set up his desk there deliberately, partly because the room soothed him and partly because it was a place Shobha avoided. So sometime in January, he stopped working in his cubicle in the library. He came out from it and he put his desk deliberately in the children's room because Shobha would avoid the children's room and he would be able to work from there peacefully. And the room soothed him. For him, the room brought some comfort. So he was happy to be in that room. So the room brought comfort to Shukumar, but it brought intense grief to Shobha. Shukumar returned to the kitchen and began to open drawers. He tried to locate a candle among the scissors and egg beaters and whisk and mortar and pestle she had bought in a bazaar in Calcutta and used to pound garlic, cloves, and cardamom powders back when she used to cook. He found a flashlight, but no batteries, and half an empty box of birthday candles. Shobha had thrown him a surprise party last May. 120 people crammed into the house. So again, Shobha was the life of the house. She always planned things in her head. And she was a person who loved surprises. So she threw a surprise party for her husband last May for his birthday, and around 120 people attended that party. They came and their house was small, so they all crammed together in that house. All friends and friends of friends they now systematically avoided. So once they invited everyone into their house and they did grand parties, but now they avoided their friends and friends of friends. Bottles of Vinho Verde had nested in the bed of ice in the bathtub. Shobha was in her fifth month, drinking ginger ale from a martini glass. She had made a vanilla ice cream cake with custard and spun sugar. All night she kept Shukumar's long fingers linked with hers as they walked among the guests and party. So again, this is a flashback, right? So earlier when she used to throw parties, especially at the time in which she threw party for Shukumar, and this was in the month of May last year. Since September, only guest had been Shobha's mother. So since September, after the incident, after Shobha had a miscarriage, the only guest that they had was Shobha's mother. She came from Arizona and stayed with them for 2 months after Shobha returned from the hospital. So it becomes clear that Shobha might have been a second generation migrant, right? So her mother was already in Arizona, and in September only Shobha's and since September only Shobha's mother came, and she came all the way from Arizona and stayed with them for over 2 months after Shobha returned from the hospital. So someone had to take care of Shobha, right? So the mother came. She cooked dinner every night and drove herself to the supermarket, washed their clothes and put them away. So the mother was again of great help because she cooked dinner every night and she went to the supermarket to buy the groceries and wash their clothes and put them away. She was a very religious woman. She set up a small shrine, a framed picture of lavender goddess and a plate of marigold petals on the bedside table in the guest room, and prayed twice a day for healthy grandchildren in the future. So see again, Shobha had a typical Indian parenting, right? So her mother was a very religious woman. She set up a small shrine in the house, and they had a framed picture of a lavender-faced goddess. So lavender-faced goddess no പറയുമ്പോഴത്തേക്കും the writer or Shukumar and Shobha, both of them don't know who she is, because she is referred to as the lavender faced goddess, right? So they are separated from their Indian culture, and she used to place a plate of marigold petals on the bedside table in the guest room, and she prayed twice a day for healthy children in the future. So she always prayed to get healthy children. So she was a typical Indian grandmother. She was polite to Shukumar without being friendly. Now, the woman was very polite to Shukumar, but she was not overly friendly, right? So, like a typical Indian mother-in-law, she was polite to him, but she was not overly friendly. She folded his sweaters with an expertise she learned from her job in department store. Shobha was born to working-class parents, and her mother worked in the department store, so she knew how to fold things. So her mother might have taught her all the minute details about how to keep a house. So she replaced a missing button of his winter coat and knit him a beige and brown scarf, presenting it to him without the least bit of ceremony, as if he had only dropped it and hadn't noticed. She even talked to him about Shobha once when he mentioned the baby's death. She looked up from her knitting and said, "But you weren't even here." So that is a very powerful sting, right? And it ends there. So Shobha's mother came soon after the miscarriage, and she took care of the household. She did every household chore and work. And she was not friendly with Shukumar, but she behaved with him in a very polite manner. Once she even gifted him a scarf and dropped it as though it was already there. അതായത് ഒരു സ്കാർഫ് ശുകുമാറിന് കൊടുത്തു. ശുകുമാറിന്റെ ഓൾറെഡി ശുകുമാറിന്റെ കയ്യിൽ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്ന സ്കാർഫ് പോലെയാണ് അത് കൊടുത്തത്. ഒരു സെറിമോണി ഒന്നും ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ല. ഗിഫ്റ്റ് ആണ് എന്നൊന്നും പറഞ്ഞിട്ടല്ല കൊടുത്തത്. കീപ് ഇറ്റ് വിത്ത് യു എന്ന രീതിയിലാണ് ആ സ്കാർഫ് കൊടുത്തത്. So she was just polite with him, and she was not overly friendly. And once Shukumar was talking about Shobha's miscarriage and about the baby's death, when suddenly Shobha's mother told him that, "But you weren't even there." നിനക്കെങ്ങനെ ഇതിനെപ്പറ്റി ആധികാരികമായിട്ട് പറയാൻ പറ്റും? നീ അവിടെ ഉണ്ടായിരുന്നില്ലല്ലോ. This might have been a very big sting for Shukumar, right? Because he was not there. But that doesn't mean that he has no right to mourn over the death of their child. Because he too was a father, and he too might have felt the pain, right? But the mother dismissed him off by saying that you were not even there when she needed you the most. It struck him as odd that there were no real candles in the house. So that stops there, that conversation stops there. And now again we are brought back to the present. It struck him as odd that there were no real candles in the house, that Shobha hadn't prepared for such an ordinary emergency. He looked now for something to put the birthday candles in, and settled on the soil of a potted ivy that normally sat on the window sill over the sink. Even though the plant was inches from the tap, the soil was so dry that he had to water it before the candles would stand straight. He pushed aside things on the kitchen table, the piles of mail, the unread library books. He remembered their first meals there, when they were so thrilled to be married, to be living together in the same house at last, that they would just reach for each other foolishly, more eager to make love than to eat. He put down 2 embroidered placemats, a wedding gift from an uncle in Lucknow, and set out the plates and wine glasses they usually saved for the guest. He put the ivy in the middle, and a white-edged, star-shaped leaves girded by 10 little candles. He switched on the digital cloak radio and turned it to a jazz station. So now we are brought back to the present, and Shukumar is arranging the table. Now there were no real candles in the house because Shobha hadn't bought candles, and she was not even prepared for this ordinary emergency, this temporary matter. He looked now for something to put the birthday candles in. So he took the birthday candles and he wanted to put it in some candelabra. So he was looking for something to put in the candles, and settled on the soil of a potted ivy that normally sat on the windowsill over the sink. So he found a plant, and he thought that he would just put these birthday candles on the soil of the plant. Now the plant was just a few inches from the tap, but still it was not watered enough. The soil was dry, so he had to water the pot, and then he had to place the candles inside. So ഈ ivy വെച്ചിരുന്ന പോട്ട് എന്ന് പറയുന്നത് അതിൽ soil undarunnu, but it was dry. It shows that even they didn't care about the plants that were there in their home, right? Indoor plants in a polum care cheyyunnundarunilla. There was not enough water in that ivy plant, so he had to pour in water and then place the candle in it. He pushed aside the things on the kitchen table, piles of mail and unread library books. He remembered their first meals there, when they were so thrilled to be married, to be living together in the same house at last, that they would just reach each other foolishly. Now he had to rearrange the things that were there in the table, because in the table there were piles of mails that Shobha had to collect. Then there were unread library books that he had to read. Then he remembered about the first meals that they had there in that particular dining table. In those days, when they were filled with love, they wanted to reach out to each other, and they were more eager to make love, to be intimate than to eat in those days, right? In the early days of their relationship. He put down two embroidered placemats, but now he wanted to create a romantic atmosphere, so he put down two embroidered placemats that he had gotten as a gift from his uncle in Lucknow as a wedding gift. So he placed embroidered placemats, which was gifted to him by an uncle in Lucknow as a wedding gift, and then he placed the plates on top of the mats. He placed wine glasses, which was only saved for the guests. Then he placed the wine glasses, and the wine glasses was all usually saved for the guests. It was usually saved if some guests came, then they would serve them in the wine glasses. He put the ivy in the middle, the white edged star shaped leaves girdled by the 10 little candles. So again, he put the ivy in the middle. He put the plant in the middle, and in the plant, he put the candles. So again, the leaves were a bit charred by the candles. He switched off the digital clock radio and turned it to a jazz station. So he switched off the digital clock radio and turned it into a jazz station. He changed the channel to a jazz station. So slowly they are going to have a meal together. Now we can end this lecture on that note, because it's going to be a long lecture. So we shall stop it there, and we shall discuss the remaining part in another recording. Thank you for listening. Take care.